Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get used to knowing why you believe what you believe so that when it comes to being uncomfortable, you can actually take a stand and actually stand up for your values.
There is a groupthink that has set in to this that we just do because of convenience, and it's easy, and it's what everyone does. So if everyone does it, it must be okay.
Look at the man in the mirror. Look at yourself before you go criticize, and watch out for the dangers of groupthink.
If your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Hey, well, welcome everybody to CTZN. Great to have you guys from wherever you're watching us. Jeremy, welcome from Winnipeg. How you doing?
Like that double salute?
The double salute?
Double.
There you go.
Good. Yeah, here in Winnipeg, it's nice to be here, but also excited to be back in Calgary. So that's coming soon. But for now, the show goes on and we continue to record.
Yeah, man. Thank you to technology and all of our crew. Makes it happen. It's a little strange not having you in the room 2 weeks in a row,
sure.
but you'll be back soon enough, which is good. A number of things we want to touch on. Last week, obviously, we were talking about the vote of non-confidence that was going around. In previous weeks, we know the fake breakup that happened between Mr. Jagmeet Singh and the Liberals. Yeah. And obviously, it was a fake breakup because we all know the Bloc as well as the NDP. They voted to basically throw down the vote of non-confidence that
to side with the Liberals.
So let's talk about that, because that was, I thought, very interesting. That was obviously a big move that happened. And Jagmeet went back on everything he was saying.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's actually surprised that it didn't pass, which speaks to itself that there's no real trust, it seems like, in the words that they say. And like I said, nobody was surprised. Every news report I saw, every news anchor was, well, we got the results we were expecting to get, but Jagmeet sided with the Liberals, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was just like that on repeat. Even I was watching Hal on BCN, and that's exactly what he was saying too. It's like everybody anticipated it. It's pretty sad because we know they don't support, but yet they're still supporting. And so I hear the Conservatives are going to table another non-confidence, so we'll see when that comes. It might just be on repeat here.
Well, it might be, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that Singh voted in favor of his pension because he is not leading in his own area of where he wants to vote. And also the Bloc, which was interesting. I'm not sure if people have been following this, but Yves Blanchette and the Bloc, who is the Quebec, call it the Quebec Party, right? They are fighting always in interest of what they think is best for Quebec, is they essentially have a bunch of demands, right, that want to be met. And he's been a lot more vocal in terms of trying to show discontent with Trudeau and the Liberals, but at the same time, he's going to spin that and will it for getting demands that is better for Quebecers. So interesting. So I want to show you a video, Jared, to get your reaction in just a moment, because this is an interesting interview that Yves Blanchette put out just a couple days ago, 3 days ago, answered a question, which I got some thoughts on it, but I want to hear your thoughts after. Here it goes.
Okay. Have you already spoken with the other parties about your October 29th deadline? What is the other party's reaction?
We have not. We have spoken with nobody about that. That's what I was preparing in my little head for the last few days, and we have had no discussions. However, I am entirely open to the idea of having such discussions with other party leaders.
I like his demeanor, just so you know. Overall, I like his demeanor. But what he's talking about is he put a deadline on the Liberals and certain demands. Some people have been using the word extortion, but demands that he wants to basically have Canada meet, or the Prime Minister and the Liberals to meet, in order for him to play ball with them, right? Essentially for the Bloc to continue to support the Liberals. We know the NDP is propping them up, but the Bloc also has got some sway, and we also know sentiment has been changing. There are some people who think the Bloc could potentially, if Liberals fail this badly in the next election, that the Bloc could gain a substantial amount of seats. And who knows? I'm not saying this, but repeating other people So take note, I'm repeating other people, is that maybe the bloc could form an opposition, which would be crazy. But essentially what he's saying here is that he's now extended his deadline another month in order to get what he wants of it. But then that last part when he goes, however, he's willing to talk to other parties, aka the Conservatives, about things that he wants. Made my brain spin a little bit. Reason why it made my brain spin a bit. Sorry, go ahead, Jer.
No. Go. I want to hear why.
It made my brain spin a bit because it leaves a potential door open for the Conservatives to make a little bit of a deal with the Bloc. We know the Bloc ultimately wanted and probably continue to this day want to separate from Canada, right? They are there to serve Quebecers. They come out of separatist agendas, and I know that's still probably a big sentiment within the party, but it would be interesting if they end up making a deal with the Conservatives to give the Bloc what they want. So who knows what they want? And then at the same time, Conservatives kind of get what they want in terms of more support. So I'm just saying there's some interesting paradigm shifts that are happening with this.
Yeah, for sure. I just Googled how many, if they partnered, how many seats would that bring it to? And that would bring it to 151 seats. And to get a majority, you would need 170.
Okay, so you'd still need...
Yeah.
You'd still need NDP.
So the NDP still has a swing vote here. And the Bloc and Conservative, I can't imagine would ever do that. But even if they did in some scenario.
But you just watched a video saying, however, we'd be open to talking to other parties. So he's obviously... He's using that, but I just wonder. I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I trust nothing. I trust absolutely nothing. They've trained us not to trust them. It seems silly, and they're just playing their games right now. And so we'll see how this pans out. So he said to October 29, right?
Yeah, end of the month. I want to show you one more as well, where our prime minister seemingly by accident called the carbon tax election in Parliament in House. You want to see it? Pretty funny. Here it is.
Freudian slip.
Mr. Speaker, again, with the clever little performance of slogans he's memorized without any actual solutions for Canadians. He doesn't care about Canadians. He cares about his own political self-interest. If he cared about Canadians, he wouldn't have voted against dental care. He wouldn't have voted against more spaces at $10 a day childcare. He wouldn't have voted against initiatives that are growing the economy, putting more money in people's pockets. He wants a climate change election. Let's have that election in the right time.
Let's have that election make the Conservatives going crazy. And now the Liberals stand up there.
They all stand up. Yay! They're like, oh crap, did he say that?
You said it right.
Hilarious.
Freudian slip.
That's funny. When he was on the late night show last week, it was hard to watch because you just know that he's exaggerating these things and just lying and I saw somebody comment on what he was saying and breaking it down thing for thing and kind of just pointing out lie.
Yep.
But then the guy said at the end, he's like, at the same time too, he goes, I actually believe Justin believes what he's saying is actually true. Like he's so deceived that what he's responding to is that it's actually true. And I thought that was a key point. Like one of the things that you and I, when we were discussing today's show, is to discuss the idea of groupthink and or the dangers of it, because it's pretty wild, and I think that's part of the issue that we're seeing in almost all political arenas across the world, is that a lot of people don't know why they believe what they believe, but they follow the thinking of the majority around them. They'll be at a lunch table at work and a whole bunch of people are bashing somebody. They'll just kind of slip right into line and fall with it. And so it's not above politicians either. Like a lot of these MPs, I guarantee you, they're just party associated, they're loyal, and they're going to fight for it forever, and they believe what it is they're standing for, and that's just it. And so it's extremely dangerous place to be, especially when the future of our country is in our hands and we have to vote. We have to build the best country we can.
Groupthink is an interesting phenomenon, and we've talked about this a lot. And I think it's in quite a bit of area. It's quite a bit in our country in how we think, because most people just want to get along with other people, right? Which is not a bad thing. We obviously all want to get along, but it's a phenomenon that basically it prioritizes us getting along over reasonable decision-making, critical thinking, to the point of making bad decisions and not thinking, as we say, play the movie out, or is this really going to get us to where we want to go? And we've seen it in a lot of different areas of our society. I think the idea of DEI, which we've covered extensively on different episodes, right? A lot of things that drive our policies. You could probably resort back to groupthink. People just jump on a bandwagon because they want to be in consensus with each other, as opposed to critically thinking and being the one that's going to be in opposition. You look at COVID hysteria and what happened for a couple of years there. That was the definition of groupthink in action on a daily basis.
No, absolutely, and I think it's so subtle, and it's in our schools. It's everywhere. It's in our political horizons, and we actually have to be really aware of it. I was watching a few videos in kind of thinking about this topic, and I don't know if you've seen the show Just for Laughs Gags.
Yep. And
essentially, it's a hilarious show that just does all these little gags, but they use human nature and human psychology with these types of things like groupthink, or another word is like human conformity, where we will conform to the norms of what the environment is we're around them. And so I was watching one just a few minutes ago where they paid a bunch of actors to get into an elevator, and to, like, you know how when you get in an elevator, you walk in and you turn, hit the button, and you face the door because you're about to walk out the door, so you walk out the door. And so they paid a bunch of actors to walk in, hit the button, and face their back to the door. And so there's one person who's in there who's not an actor, and they're kind of sitting there facing the door, and there's like 7 people all facing the back. And so after about a minute, you can tell she's uncomfortable, and so she kind of turns half sideways. And then another person, they get to a new floor, one person gets off, one gets on, and again, it's another actor, faces the back. And now that another person's been introduced, she now fully turns around and faces the back wall. And then they go all the way up, and then they get off the floor. They all have to turn around to leave, and they leave. And it's human conformity. But like, I think that the best version of anyone is to be somebody who would just feel comfortable enough to be like, what are you guys doing? What are we like, that would be to me a very common sense approach to that. Be like, what's happening here? Why are we all facing the back? Even if it was just a subtle, soft joke, that's probably how I would do it. But I find that we're so scared of what people think, and we don't want to stand out. And if you're so scared of that, you're going to be manipulated in your future. You're going to be controlled, and you have to get out of that bubble. Like, you must get out of that, because it's dangerous if you're staying in there.
And also, you won't make good decisions, right? You'll make decisions that go along with the group.
That's what I mean by saying it's dangerous. Yeah.
Like, remember the statement moms used to always say, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge, right? It's the idea of groupthink, of just going along with a bad decision or a dumb decision. And if we aren't careful, if we actually don't train ourselves and are aware to speak up and to be okay with not conforming when it's important, and even when it's not important, it's good to have the habit and be okay with going against the grain, going upstream, right? How many different analogies can we use that show that you're willing to prioritize truth, critical thinking, good decision making, being reasonable in what you do. You prioritize that over just getting along and being accepted by peers or by society, right? Because it's just, we are seeing right now in real live action that idea of groupthink leading to real bad decisions. You can go back through history, Jer. You can look at the emergence of Nazi Germany in the 30s and the late 30s. You even look at the church, the Christian church in the 30s and the late 30s, and how much groupthink settled into that to actually go along and support what turned out to be a Nazi agenda, right? Because it slowly conformed. It's the whole idea of the frog. How do you boil a frog? You don't throw it in the hot water. You go and you put it in tepid water and lukewarm and slowly increase the temperature so people get used to it. And groupthink, if you're not careful about it, is that you can lose what you have with groupthink because you just are willing to go along.
Absolutely. Like, I have a clip here of Jordan Peterson, and I'll send it to the chat because I didn't realize ahead of time. Give me a sec. I'll give it to you.
I found that after that, I want to show you another clip as well. I found that I think contributes to the ideas from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just after he was elected in 2015. Talking about some of the agendas he wants to do. And it's interesting hearing him statements back then, because I feel those have led into a lot of groupthink of prioritizing different things that aren't important when it comes to certain positions, like qualifications, like merit, like have you worked your way towards it, as opposed to things like what DEI offer, right? Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives, and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
Pause right there for a second. So, like, the reason I want to bring up this clip is that Jordan's posturing individual responsibility over groupthink and the pressures that come with that to be a social justice warrior for something that you most often can't even speak to, nor do you have a reason and have even the data to back it up. And so he's essentially saying, why are we so obsessed with these social issues when our own house isn't in order? And when you look at this girl, this is the girl who asked the question. We didn't actually show it to the people of the question because her question was very long-winded and hard to understand. So they rephrased it for her. But even her, when they cut to her, she's doing this. Like, what he said is not an irrational thing to say. He's saying, like it's the whole look at the man in the mirror. Look at yourself before you go criticizing and watch out for the dangers of groupthink. Now, so as he's saying, social issues. Fantastic. We have to look after these things. And some of these things that, like, I don't want people to misinterpret what we're saying about groupthink, because we're talking about the dangers of groupthink and how it causes you not to think critically and do irrational and ridiculous things as you watch human behavior. But it seems like they use this crux of human psychology to manipulate people. Like when you strip down, you mentioned COVID before. It's like when you strip down what was happening with COVID and you try to get to the core of it all, is we were dealing with something we didn't know what it was. And for a long time, we thought it was extremely deadly and we were trying to maximize and save lives. And so, but when data started coming out to realize, well, it's not quite as deadly as we thought, and the vaccine isn't quite tested as we thought, and there were some things that were some chinks in the armor, those were not being brought up as an intellectual argument, nor were they being brought up fairly at all. But what they did was they used fear to cause people to act in a way of manipulating them to be in a groupthink type state, thus getting them to do what they needed to be done and to shut places down. And it took a lot of very brave people to resist the powers of groupthink and to threaten their livelihood and their being, and to possibly threat fines and so on and so on and so on. But it took a lot of people to finally go, enough's enough. But it took a lot of resistance to do that. And so he's saying individual responsibility is the solution to groupthink. And I could not put it any clearer than that. And that's kind of what you and I are generally always saying with our show, is like, dig in deep, find the reasons why, ask why. Where'd you hear that from? But why? Who are they? What's their credentials? Why are they saying that? Are they paid by pharma? Are they paid by what is, like, you just kind of pull back a bit, dig in, and you'll get some answers to some things. But
well, even the example you're giving there is if you do that, if people do that, you're actually taking now personal responsibility for the information that you're taking in, and guaranteed you're going to repeat. People don't take personal responsibility for the headlines they just read and they spout off to someone else. Propaganda they get and they spout off to someone else. And you haven't taken any responsibility to find out, is this actually truthful? And I find our society has been conditioned to value the appearance of being an expert or the appearance of being virtuous, right? Virtue signaling. The appearance of having it all together, but not actually having it all together. And personal responsibility shows, no, I'm actually going to make sure I have everything in order first. And I know that the appearance comes later. I'm actually not even concerned about the appearance, because I'm actually concerned about the real thing. of having my life in order or having whatever in order. But we skip that so often because we want to appear a certain way, right? That's the whole thing with virtue signaling. It's all over politicians. It's all over leaders and celebrities, people with a microphone. It's like, gosh, you're the most unvirtuous person, and yet you're virtue signaling to everyone else about how much of a moral high ground you stand on. It's just so frustrating and sick to see that stuff over and over again.
No, I know for sure. And and the thing that always gets me is, I don't know. It's hard. It's easy to say. It's hard to do. But like, I generally go against the grain, especially when it's intercepting with my core values and stuff. And like, I want to encourage people. Figure these things out before you get into a pressure situation. You know, if you are kind of struggling with it, going, I don't know why you believe what you believe, know your values, know your standards, so that when the pressure situation comes, you take a solid stand. And like, this might be a super micro, tiny little example that I want to give, but like, I've started doing pat downs whenever it's some of those like body scanning machines, because I found out the one that you know what I'm talking about, the one where you put your hands above your head and in Canada it scans you. I found out that they haven't been properly tested, and that there's not regulated, and that they're not even, when I asked the employees there, I said, can I get some details on what kind of scanning it does? They said it's FDA approved by this. And I went, FDA isn't even in Canada. Like, I was like, the FDA is the United States Food and Drug Administration for the USA. It's not here. Like, what about our standards? And the guy was like, I don't know. And I said, so you have no idea? And they said, nope. And so then I started looking it up, and there's apparently no regulation nor standards on it at all. And so I'm going, okay, well, until I know what that thing is doing to scan me, because it can see through my clothes to find out if I have a piece of paper in my pocket, I'm going, I want to know what that is. And so now, because I fly so often and I go back and forth, I'm going, until I know, I'm now going to get a pat down every time I go through the airport when it's that machine. And so I get to the airport, and this was literally 2 days ago. I get to the machine and I said, hi there. I said, I'd just like to do a pat down. He goes, oh, you can't. And I went,
you can't.
No, I wasn't asking you. I said, I was letting you know I'd like a pat down. You can't refuse it. And I said, I can refuse the machine. Yes. I said, I fly every few days. Like, I fly often. And then all of a sudden, he was trying to like bully me into it. And I was there for it all day. I was like, let's go. And so all of a sudden I said, no, you can call your manager, call your boss, whatever. I said, but I'm refusing it. And the boss comes over and goes, what's the problem? And then he goes, I said, I'd like a pat down. Do you have a medical device that requires you not to use this machine? And I just looked at him and said, I'd like a pat down. No, but do you have a medical device that, I said, I told you I'd like a pat down. I don't need to share my medical history with you or what I have or even my reason. I'd like a pat down. And finally the guy goes, okay, yeah, he's allowed a pat down. Let him go do a pat down.
My gosh.
And I just thought, I'm like, what a manipulative, like ridiculous. I'm a very confrontational person who's very comfortable under those scenarios, but most people aren't. If that was my mom, she'd be like, okay, sounds good, I'm sorry, and just immediately done it. But to me, it was something I had pre-decided ahead of time. And most people would cave to any of those pressures, and that's wrong. And that's what I can't stand.
Yeah.
And so for those things, it makes me double down. I'd sit there all day. I'd miss my plane if I had to, if it meant it. But I want to encourage people, because when you're in that pressure situation, if you don't know why, if it's because, well, my husband told me to, or my spouse told me to, don't have that as your reason. Know why you stand for the reason you're taking a stand.
Well, you know what's an interesting thing too is I think the tide is starting to turn on this, but in the last 10 years, you noticed and the idea of groupthink when it comes to food and processed foods and the things that people are consuming. And you've noticed a shift of there are people who are now trying to be careful with what they're putting in their body, right? And for years and years, you look at America, for example, at how America is truly a sick nation. Like with obesity rates off the charts, especially in children. You look at the amount of foods, and the FDA is laughable in terms of what they allow through, because you compare what the FDA, when I was in Portugal, side note, Portugal last year, and I literally, Danielle called one of the sisters because we were looking at Coke in Portugal. And if you read the ingredients list in Portugal and compare it to Coca-Cola in the US, the ingredients list is like twice as long because a lot of countries in the EU just outlaw so many substances that we allow in our foods. But what's interesting about this is that people would and still will push back, right? When it comes to even making fun of, well, you go through that much effort to look through the ingredients on your food. And well, there is a group think that has set in to this that we just do because of convenience and it's easy and it's what everyone does. So if everyone does it, it must be okay, right? But if you look at where it's actually taken most people to becoming an extremely sick nation. And it was interesting. The reason I brought this up, because a couple nights ago, I'm not sure if you saw this, but the former head of the CDC, the former director of the CDC, I believe his name was Robert Redfield. Did you hear this? He's a guy that RFK basically raked over the coals in his book. RFK raked Redfield over the coals for the CDC allowing such things, and it's causing people to be sick and blah, blah, blah. But Redfield actually recently endorsed Trump because of this singular reason, because Trump said he would bring in RFK to relook and to look at chronic disease and the food and the processing of food in the US, because RFK is the one guy that can go ahead and make this better, because he's actually going against the grain of what everything's going to. And he actually goes and says that, like, I'll read a quote here where he says that we know chronic disease is more than 75% of the country's $4 trillion annual healthcare expenditure. Unfortunately, we become a sick nation. This is what Redfield's saying. We're paying too much for chronic disease, and this must change. We need to make America healthy again. Goes through childhood obesity and the complexity of it, but the primary origin is clearly the modern American diet of highly processed foods. And this is interesting. The reason I'm bringing that up, because that's a shift of a guy who used to be a part of the problem, right, of purporting groupthink. And he's now actually shifted the other way, because RFK is pushing against the grain of what groupthink is. And they actually had a meet like a week ago, and Redfield said to him, first thing he said after they said hi, he goes, "You were right," after raking him through the coals in his book. So just this idea, you have conformity, and conformity will run and get momentum like a snowball, but it takes some people to actually be willing to step out. It's the first man through the door syndrome, right? To step out and actually start asking critical questions. Wait, are we healthier than we were before? Do we have higher rates of obesity? Like I'm being very specific to the food industry right now, but you can apply this nature of thought to any area of life, whether it's politics, whether it's family, whether it's relationship, whether it's religion, right? Whether it's all these different things, is to be this critical thinker, not just conform to groupthink. And when people start pushing the opposite direction, it will start to expose bad ideas pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and it's a greater look at bias. That's why, like, confirmation bias, or even conflict of interest. Like, it's like there's a whole reason why they don't ask people to do this, because you can't seem to look past what you have a bias towards. And like, even I find, because when I look online during this topic, there's a lot of criticism for groupthink when it comes to religion, as you mentioned, and a lot of people think, well, there's no evidence for a God, there's no this, and it's like, I even myself, I bumped into an atheist and had this very same conversation and said, like, look, you have a certain level of faith to believe what you're believing, and so does someone who's believing in the Bible. Like, they're both at this level. And I was getting on a plane and taking off last week. I don't know if you saw my Instagram story, but I thought it was super interesting, because I got into ChatGPT and I decided to just ask it, and I'll pull it up here. I thought it was pretty funny. I said to ChatGPT, because I was wrestling with this concept, I was looking through groupthink and like atheism versus Christianity and creationism versus this. And one person online said in the video I was watching to the atheist, "You have more faith than me." And I went, "Isn't that interesting?" It's an interesting line. So I went on ChatGPT and I said, "Do you think the earth was created or just coincidence? Answer only in one sentence." And this is what ChatGPT said: "I believe the earth's complexity and order point more toward intentional creation rather than coincidence."
Yeah.
Like, isn't that interesting?
That's awesome.
I was like, and the thing that I love so much about ChatGPT is exactly what we're saying. It just spits out the facts, as long as you get the facts. But you have to even watch for the answers it gives too. Is like, sometimes it'll try to push you in a direction and you have to strip it down so that it doesn't give you a confirmation bias, because someone's also programmed this thing too. So you have to be really careful.
That's cool, because it is a growing consensus amongst that field, that there has to be some sort of intelligent design. You go through the fine-tuning argument of how things are so finely with precision. They're tuned, right, to make things work. If you look at just even how water and oxygen is made up and the perfect combination, the tilt of the earth, there are all these things that there's so many amounts to that. But that's the idea. You have this growing consensus of when people start to actually look into the details and critically think, and then they start to shift, that's a pretty cool thought. But groupthink's a killer, man. It really is a killer. And we're all subject to it, right? There's areas in my life that I bet you I conform to groupthink that I'm not even aware of. Like if I have to go through systematically through my life and find out what am I just doing because I'm just doing it. Because maybe it's been easier, because society has just conditioned you to do that. Like we all have those areas and they're not always bad, but if you just conform to groupthink, you're going to have a lot of pain in other areas because you happen to get it wrong, right? So, anyways, man.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. You were mentioning that you had a video you wanted to show me, but I interrupted you.
Yeah, let me pull it up. Here we are. Okay, so this is an interview with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau back in 2015, looking ahead. I thought it was quite interesting, his comments, and I think we can...
What was the context of it again? Why?
Groupthink, under the idea of groupthink and what drives a certain ideology. And I think this has helped groupthink pick up a lot of momentum in Canada. But you tell me your thought. I'm just going to shift here.
In the future, what would you like your government's legacy on LGBT issues to be?
To get it to a point when we have an LGBT prime minister and nobody notices. I think just understanding that this is a trend line we're on, that we still have more work to do. But I think if the legacy is us anchoring Canada as a place of openness and respect and defense of everyone's rights, then that'll be a good one.
So I thought that was interesting because to be honest, when it comes to thinking about positions of leadership and prime ministership, my brain doesn't go to sexuality.
Oh, no.
My brain doesn't go to that as a qualification. And he's bringing it up. I kind of maybe get what he's trying to say about how he doesn't want it to be a stigma that withholds somebody from a position. But what this is, I think, led to in the idea of groupthink, and we've seen this now exponentially go through DEI, is that these things actually prioritize or can prioritize people for different things. But when you think of positions of leadership, it's nothing to do with sexuality. I don't care if you have a gay or...
Nothing at all. And that's what you're like, there's a couple years back, the last Summer Olympics we had, there was an athlete posted on CBC's page and it said the first gay man to win in this area. And I looked at it and went, why did they just bring up his sexuality? I was like, he's an Olympic athlete. Has nothing to do with sexuality. Nothing in the slightest anything. So I was like, why does it have to do with that? So I commented and I said, why are we talking about someone's sexuality when the athlete won a gold in his field? That's what we should be talking about. And again, to speak to groupthink, every LGBT supporter in the world just seemed to come after me there, but no one really had an articulate argument. And they just said, quit hating. I'm not hating on it at all, actually. I'm just going, they have nothing to do with each other. Just exactly like you're saying, when you think leadership, why do you go to sexuality? It has nothing to do with it at all.
And that's... go ahead.
Bizarre. It's just bizarre. I just find it so strange.
It is a strange phenomenon, and I think that stemmed out of this idea of groupthink, because when I view of someone, like you said, with this athlete doing, I just think, wow, that's an amazing athlete. Look at what they accomplished. Their sexuality doesn't contribute to that. It is that has nothing to do with it yet, but we are putting a focus and a lens on that as if it is something that helped and contributed. Same idea with this idea of leadership and prime ministers, that if we've got someone who's qualified and is a great leader for our country and they have a different sexual orientation, you know what? That doesn't matter, because if they're qualified and they do a great job and they lead the country the way it needs to be led, well, you know what? Why are we making a focus? And I just think that's an idea of groupthink that's continued to move on into that. And it's just an interesting phenomenon how we can keep peeling back the layers and find out where this is actually settling.
Well, and it's interesting that you it's actually interesting that you picked that clip, because I wouldn't have first caught on to that. But you're very right to kind of expose the relationship he's making between those two topics of leadership and homosexuality, and or not even just LGBTQ. So everything that goes with that. And so, but it's my point in this is that it's subtle. It's very, very subtle in these types of, especially when it comes to from a PM talking who is representing the country with every word the PM says. It's very, very subtle when you start to. But when you start to look through the lens of groupthink and what's happening and what things are slowly programming you, you start to see it everywhere, and it actually is everywhere.
Yeah. So when it comes to groupthink, I think there's a couple of things I wanted to jump to with just as our last couple minutes of the show in terms of news events that are going on. But I guess any final words with groupthink we want to close on?
No, I think it bothers me so much, and that's why I think we just have to be so on guard for it. I think if I had to just encapsulate it, if I was raising my kids, talking with them, I'd want to show them some of these experiments. Like in our last show, we talked about the standing and the beeping thing, which is why we wanted to kind of touch on this. For those of you who haven't seen it, we fully explain it there, and it's just a ridiculous social experiment where people just conform because they're uncomfortable in a situation. And I guess the point I want to make is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get used to knowing why you believe what you believe, so that when it comes to being uncomfortable and saying it, you can do it. You can actually take a stand and actually stand up for your values. Because man, there's nothing more than feeling a certain way and acting a different way. You start to lose your integrity at your core. And when it comes to losing your integrity at your core, and you keep doing that repetitively, time and time and time again, you start to lose respect for yourself. And then when it comes to a real big issue, you won't stand when it's time to stand. And that's why there's a clip of Jordan Peterson explaining what you mentioned already back in the 1930s with World War II in Germany. And a lot of people, they'll look back, and we all learned about the history books and what happened in this. And everyone, Jordan says this, he goes, everybody thinks that they would be the ones, the Corrie ten Booms. Everybody thinks that that's who they'd be. You'd be the one hiding the Jews in your house. And he goes, statistically, no, you actually wouldn't be. You'd be the one pointing them out and getting people killed because you were too scared to speak up, or you were conforming slowly over time, and you had no ability to stand for the values that you actually believe in.
Well, modern evidence of that too. You look at COVID and how many people so quickly were willing to turn on their neighbors to report and get after them because they didn't comply with what the group, the perceived group consensus was. People flipped on a dime on each other. Families were split because of this idea of groupthink.
Oh, there's so many points of contention and hypocrisy everywhere. And it was I remember getting into a conversation with all my neighbors in the neighborhood because they were trying to get us to put masks on our kids to go play in the playground right next to our house. And I just told them, I said, I will not be for my children. They will not at all. If your kids don't feel safe, I would recommend that you maybe don't send them there. But we feel safe and we feel fine, and we're going to continue to do that. Not to mention that UV kills any of these bugs, and you're outdoors in fresh air, et cetera, et cetera. It's not an enclosed space. And so when I finally got to a place where we respected each other and we could actually talk very freely, because at first it was very heated, I finally said, if you're open to it, I could love to show you how I got to believe what I believe. And my neighbor went, yeah, I would. And I said, awesome. And so we started talking and showing, and I said, do you see this stat and this stat and this number? And look at the contradiction here and here and here. And we finally showed him. It wasn't but 2 or 3 days later, none of his kids were wearing masks outside and they were having a good time. And
wow.
He didn't know why he believed what he believed. He just saw the guy on the TV going, put on the masks or you're going to die.
Well, and to your credit, you weren't doing the same thing that maybe the others who believed it were, in the sense of just taking a stance for the sake of taking a stance. You actually had empirical evidence to answer the question, why do I believe this? And I think we can apply that to anything. Is if you ask yourself, why do I believe it? Well, is there evidence that at least leans towards that or supports your decision? Or have you just arrived at that because
But it was and the reason I say get to know that feeling of uncomfortable now, because It required me to be uncomfortable every time I went to a store, every single time.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many managers I talked to, how many security guards I talked to, and I'd ask them, do you know why? Do you know why? What's the policy here? Do you know the legal? None of them. Nope. And I had to educate and talk and have a respectful conversation. It was exhausting.
Yep.
Absolutely exhausting. But because my values were attached to it, and I had real reason, real data, I had to kind of like what felt like fight the good fight and just kind of get uncomfortable and talk with people, because eventually people started to realize, okay, yeah, this is the common sense, but it took a very, very long time.
Well, for all you guys watching, we'd love to hear what you think. What are some areas in our society in Canada or in your life that you have seen groupthink or have been guilty of groupthink? I'd be interested to see if you're aware of it, or if you notice it, or maybe this conversation is making you a bit more aware of that phenomenon that does happen. So let us know in the comments and all those things. I guess, Jared, a couple of things I wanted to show you really quickly. Just a little updates on our country of Canada, because we love Canada, but want to keep you guys in the loop of everything that's going on. Here's quickly, which way's better? That was better. Here's a chart about what's happening in our country. Is that we have actually in the month of July, Jared, we added about 32,000 jobs, but about 83,000 people.
Oh, jeez.
Isn't that crazy? And if you look at the stat that I'm looking at here, is that you can see where most of the job growth actually happened. They actually happened in the public sector. So healthcare, social assistance, educational services, public administration, that's where the greatest job growth
What
has
was
happened.
the average age of those people? Do you know?
I don't have that stat.
How many
no.
were working adults and stuff?
I don't have that stat. That's but the interesting thing, that will be a part of it for sure in terms of how many people were added. But the interesting thing on this though is that you look at, we've actually had negative job growth in areas that produce economic output, like manufacturing, construction, administration and support, utilities, mining, quarrying and oil, transportation, warehousing, forestry, logging. Those are all on the negative aspect. So just an interesting stat to keep you up to date with what's happening in our country of Canada.
Yeah.
That one stood out to me. There was one more I wanted to show as well. I wanted your thoughts on this. Is that
it says that actually the number I got that ChatGPT is saying is actually 97,600 people last month. So mind you, I guess that's August I'm talking. So you were referring to July, weren't you?
July, that's right. And then one other guy came across on Twitter. His name's Marty up north. Have you ever heard of him before?
No.
He's got quite a following.
Oh, yes. And he's got a great channel.
He came across here saying Danielle Smith on May 29th, 2023. One of her biggest campaign promises was to provide tax relief to Albertans. It's one of the fastest and absolute easiest things she could do. Cutting the fat in government is political will. Nothing more, nothing less. I know Javier Hillel in Argentina is an example of that. Because if she can't deliver on this simple promise, what makes you think she'll deliver on harder promises like reforming AHS or defending us from Stephen Colbert? So he's just saying that it's been 486 days without a tax break in Alberta based on promises. So not trying to I thought that was an interesting take hearing him, because he's generally a supporter of her, but
it's a great point.
Just saying, are you doing what you said you'll do? And I wonder what a response would be and why it hasn't
Danielle
happened yet.
Smith. I want less taxes. Let's put her tag like right here.
We want less taxes. If you know the answers why in the comments, let us know. Is there reasonings that we're unaware of why that hasn't happened in 486 days? Alberta's a great province, but also we think if politicians do say things, we want to know at least updates as to where it's at, and if they're trying to, or if they can't, what's happening. So
she relieved the carbon tax, though. In her defense, she was the very first province to lift the carbon tax for.
She did, but it came back though. I think it was a temporary relief, wasn't it?
It came back because I think she couldn't. I think that she wasn't able to do it again. There was only like a 1-year relief that the province could protect from the federal tax on it. Mm-hmm. So, and I think Manitoba's going to bump into the same thing. They have like a 1-year clock, and then it's over again. It'll return. But that's a very significant tax. So that was a huge savings at the gas tank for everybody, day in and day out.
Totally.
So.
Right on, man. Well, enjoy the rest of your time in Winnipeg.
Awesome.
Anything else we need to get to?
Nope. I'll see you next week. I'm excited to see I bet you Pierre is going to keep putting non-confidence votes all day, every day. And so I'm curious to see if those are ever going to turn into anything. But for now, let's watch the House of Commons and see what's going to happen.
Yep. Watch the House of Commons. Stay on top of what's happening with our CPAC. Politicians. Watch CPAC. Find out what bills are being pushed through, what's being read, what's being presented. if in order to be citizens of Canada, and what we talked about a couple episodes ago, being worthy of the title of citizen, it means that you have to, as you said earlier, Jared, take personal responsibility of being informed, knowing what's going on, knowing how to speak your mind, and coming to a conclusion based on information you receive. And that's what makes Canada a country that's going to potentially continue to grow and be the best place we can live.
Last update is the UBI did not make past the second reading, so it got tossed out.
I'm all for that, man. That's good.
I know, me too. I was really glad. I was like, gosh, thank you.
You know what? You eat what you kill.
You know what, though? It is... anyway, without getting too much into it, I think they start to table these things a little bit to start getting people to palate it a little bit. So I'll be curious to see if there's actually policy coming down the road that we have to watch out for and be on watch. So.
Yep, absolutely. All right, dude.
Other than that,
see y'all later. Thank you, guys.